right. We are in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. We're going to be looking beginning at verse 15. The key element now is as we move through the peroration here, this last portion of the book. And he's given some instructions, the last minute kind of instructions of things he needs them to do. He has talked about what his plans are that he is going to do, as well as those who are working with him and accompany him. He's given them exhortations for responsibilities that kind of encompass the basic message of the book in a very positive way that they need to implement. But now as we get to verse 15, these are some different types of more personal exhortations. They are about other people, and that's kind of where we are just at this ending of the book in different ways. In verses 15 through 18, we see these personal notes about the people there, and then we end with the greetings. That's typical of how Paul would close a book. So I want us to take the opportunity and see how much, even at this portion of the book, we've covered so many different moral instructions, doctrinal kind of issues, just practical kind of things for life. But as you get down to the close, I want to emphasize to you, don't just quickly bypass these things. The lessons are sometimes subtle, but they can be very helpful at the same time. So if you will, read with me as we begin in verse 15. I urge you, brethren, you know the household of Stephanas, that it is the first fruits of Achaia, and that they have devoted themselves to the ministry of the saints, that you also submit to such, and to everyone who works and labors with us. Just at the very beginning, anytime we see this kind of wording, when he says, I urge you, that word is translated so many different ways in our translations. It's the word beseech, it's the word exhort, it's the word comfort, and here it's the word urge. So it can be in some translations even encourage, because it has this broad sense of communicating, here's what I want you to get from this. Now, the base idea of this, just to get the tone that Paul is doing as he approaches this, is he is providing a perspective, and he is calling on them to join him in that perspective. That's kind of the nature of the word, whether it's for comfort or for a lesson to be learned or for help. And so when he says, I urge you, it's a statement that says this really matters. And it's used as often as a marker, but it still has meaning. I urge you, brethren. So here in Corinth, he's going to assume, as you see this, he's assuming that they've paid attention and that they've responded favorably to the message in the first part of the book about unity, to the part about dealing with the man who had taken his father's wife, that they've listened to what he had to say about the various questions they had and the instructions that he's given, especially as it pertains to culture. What do I do in Christianity within the culture of Corinth? That's a big part of what all of this was. And then how do they make sure that they did not abuse the things they'd been given, whether the Lord's Supper or miraculous gifts, and that they did not let the worldly ideas about life affect their understanding of resurrection. So he comes down to all this. He assumes that's good. And so in a practical way, he's wanting them to get in perspective who can help them the most. I urge you, brethren, you know the household of Stephanas. So whenever Paul comes down and he is pointing them to other people, this is a congregation that we can all acknowledge has had some challenges, right? So when he is pointing them and trying to get them to have the right perspective, it's making sure that they are valuing the people he values, because they are the ones who are best for him, for them. And that's what he says is true for Stephanas. You know the household of Stephanas. So Stephanas then was the leader of that household. How big was it? Don't know. Who all would have been included in a household? You got a first century. Say it louder. Okay, the man would have been, but that'd mean like, it would include the women too. It would include the children. It would even include, actually, any servants, slaves they had. Okay, and you see this in the household codes, or what they often see, but you see that presented, say, in 1 Peter chapters 2 and 3. You see it in Ephesians 6, the way in which the writers will include. We often think, that's odd, he just went over from family into servants. No, that was very normal. Well, so you've got the household of Stephanas, but now here's why. The reason why matters. He wasn't picking favorites, saying, Stephanas, that's a good guy. I like him. There were reasons why. That is the first fruits of Achaia. Now, what does that mean, first fruits? What now? Well, they're Christians, but they're particular. All of these are Christians. So he's distinguishing the household of Stephanas from the others in some way by saying that they are first fruits. They were the first, yes, they were among the first to obey the gospel. So that means that they've been Christians longer. Okay? And the other thing I want you to think about to appreciate this is I want you to put this into a mission context. Now, how many of you have ever traveled any extent? It'd be helpful if it's overseas, but to the point of where it was really hard to find, there was no congregation. It's a challenge, right? You go, okay, I want you to imagine what it is. You've got a people, that's how Paul would enter a city. They don't know who, not just they don't know what the church is, they don't know who Jesus is. Everything in that culture is against them. It's going a particular way. Thoughts are one way. If there's any dissent, it's among the Jews. That's not helpful here. What do you have to be among the first to leave that behind? You've got to be listen, but I want you to think about what kind of heart and mindset and just character you have to have. Yeah. So these were people to launch out and to separate yourself from everybody else. When there's no one, there's a stranger here. He's traveling with a small group, but they're strangers. But that doesn't matter. They've provided enough. Remember that Paul brought the gospel. We don't know what miracles would have been done, but there was confirmation. But if you remember originally in Acts 18, Paul himself was not sure there was anybody in that city who would listen. It was a difficult spot. The culture was very much against morality, against this kind of teaching, which is why they're struggling with it. Greg?
Let's say it was also very much an honor-shame culture and a very much a group-orientated.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, you would be seen not just as weird or strange, but if you would be like rebelling against your family, against your ancestors, against your...
Yeah, that's right. And it's really no different, though. I mean, you think about how many people have trouble listening to the gospel because of family. Is because they somehow think that reflects badly on them. So I agree with you that was part of the nature of their culture. Specific honor, shame, we think of that as being more of an Eastern thing, but this was still the East technically in the Greek world. And so that was part of how they thought. So I just want you to stop and have an appreciation for Stephanas and his household of what character they had to have. That took such kind of courage That's what you immediately can tell. They are, because they are breaking out to be, as a whole household, all on their own. Now, with this, they're the first fruits of Achaia, and Achaia is that southern part of what we think of as Greece. If you think about it, it comes down, and it comes down to an isthmus is where you think about it, but Achaia is kind of that southern part. We think of, I always have to redo the geography from when I was young because we've broken things up since then. But, Macedonia is now its own country. It wasn't when I was growing up. I know what that means, Caleb. So it's rough. It's rough spending all your time with people who are younger than you are. Let me tell you. So you come down and that southern part, okay, and that's where. And Corinth was right on this isthmus, so it had made it very valuable for shipping coming in. Well, here you have this. They're the first fruits of this area. So he's already taught them. He's designated as separate from what you have going up to, say, Philippi and Berea in Thessalonica. This is a different area. He's gone through, and you've seen Athens, and so that was hard. There are people that followed in some sense. Here he says, these were among those first ones. Okay. But now look at the next part that it says about them. That was the first thing, is their willingness to step out and obey the gospel, and that they have devoted themselves to the ministry of the saints. Now, the word here, I think it's an interesting choice in the New King James to translate it as devoted. Does anyone have another translation on that word? Okay, set themselves. Offered. The word technically is ordered or arranged. I still can't hear you, Danny. Addicted to him? Wow. That is strong. The idea is, it's actually more of the idea of a determination. So all of those you just want to put into context. It's a determination that it's a rearrangement of priorities. When you have the idea of putting something in order, right? Okay, I don't want to get too far into this, but get your affairs in order. Okay? It's the whole idea that you put down what are your priorities, what you want done. Okay? For them, as they're looking at this, the point that he's tying it to that's not seen as much because of the translation is that when they obeyed the gospel, the other thing they did was they made that a different kind of priority in their life. And they, from that point forward, as Paul was teaching additional people and that congregation is growing, their priority has shifted from what it used to be. And they have arranged themselves and said, given as a priority to these people who are now coming into the church are now part of my responsibility. Now, I want you all to just reflect on that for just a second. Whenever someone obeys the gospel, they obviously have their responsibility in listening and in obeying. They should not have to have the responsibility of struggling to find their way to fit in. We should be doing that part. We need to make sure we're doing what we can, make sure they fit in with us instead of waiting for them to find out how they can fit in. Okay? The household of Stephanas took it upon themselves as essentially, you say, founding members, longtime members. It hadn't been around that long, but still, they took it that way. And to say, we're going to make sure you're included in part of all this. Now, think about how hard a job. Okay, you say, okay, that sounds good. Now, go back and think to the first part of this book about how hard a job that would be in a place of where once you get everybody in, they're dividing up into groups immediately based upon what they had already seen within their previous way within the culture. Everybody gets their own faction. And they're trying to bring people in and to make it a point to help them. The word here, what they devoted themselves, it was to the ministry. Okay? And that's a broad word. We use that in a very specific way nowadays, right? We tend to think about ministry as for ministers, and ministers are for preachers, and preachers are getting paid. And so that's what ministry is. It's what preachers do. Ministry here is actually a word. It's the root word from where the deacon's work comes from too. Okay? So the whole idea of the word, though, is from one take on it is someone. It came from an idea of a waiter or a server, okay, who is at tables. We see that in Acts chapter 6, that the apostles are not wanting to give up what they're doing to serve tables. But the whole idea was you're taking care of, you're going around and finding out what people need, and then you're taking care of it. That's what this is. It's an idea that there are certain needs and that you are being active and taking a responsibility on yourself. That's what this household had done to make sure that the people were taken care of, anybody coming in. Now, we think of, generally speaking, we like to think of ourselves being self-sufficient, right? Self-starters, and we can do things on our own. That's not always the case, though, is it? We can use help time to time. Support, emotional help, financial help. Okay? And you don't appreciate that until you're the one, maybe, or someone close to you needs. But here it's the whole. And it's the fact that they are part of that congregation, that's enough. So they're taking on the idea of saying, I'm going to take on this responsibility to serve them and to help them with whatever it is. And it can be some little things. What are some ways in which you can serve and just help people? Let's start with people who are new. We'll just start there. Okay, so you make them aware of opportunities. Okay, and make sure that they know. Now here's the challenge for this. Okay, if we just tell them, here are some things that you can be part of, and we kind of just do that on its own, and you said your call, that still requires for them to be a little bit more of a self-starter to do it, right? It needs to be personal to make it effective. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. You need to get to know them so you know kind of where they might fit better. You know, what their interests are, where maybe, I know Sister so-and-so, she likes that too. You need to meet her. Let's go over there. There she is. Let's go over and introduce personally this person and say, I want you to meet, I want you to meet one another, names and everything. The reason why we're here is you won't believe this, but, right? Now, I want to give you an example of this, so we'll see. Now, you'll know Neil Steinoff and Neil and Liz are soon to come here and join us at the school. Well, guess what they enjoy? I'm going to look right over here, and I'm going to look at Lynn and Renee and say, board games. Okay? So I've already you just heard it. I've already talked to John and Rachel. So we're going to set up this. I told them I'm just going to set them up, have them over at the house. You bring the games. I'm just going to stand back and watch. Okay? Because they enjoy that. But get to know people on a social level, but also about what are you interested in, what do you have to offer? What would you like to be involved in? What would you like to learn? Sometimes y'all underestimate those of you in the foyer that are pointing people to where the right way to go or where a Bible class is. That's something people don't know. Okay? Who's teaching? What's going on? What might be good? Introduce them to the people that they maybe would need to know more. All of those things. The specific needs, as you get to know someone, you take the time to know someone, maybe then they're going to be comfortable talking about it more. Okay? So that means you have to invest in people. And then, okay, there's something else here. What can we do? That's what I want you to understand and get a picture of for what was going on here with the household of Stephanas. And that when they arranged themselves, they ordered themselves unto ministry. That was the end idea of ministry. This was the purpose of it. Now, the last thing I want to look at in this verse is, what do you think the difference is between ministry of the saints, ministry to the saints, and ministry for the saints? Because different translations translate all those different ways. So you get a little bit different feel to it. In the New King James, it says ministry of the saints. I think personally, I think that's the least likely for grammatical reasons. To, for, the idea is it's in their direction. Okay, so it's not, the difference here when I say ministry of the saints, it's not in a sense of a kind of a patronizing kind of pat on the head kind of thing, but it's rather, it's going the direction of what is needed for them. And so it's more active than that. Maybe it is more so in the Greek than it is in English, I don't know. But the whole idea is that you have them in mind. It is not simply something that this is a job. It is something for people. And it's for God's people. They're saints. And that we want to make sure to take care of them, and to whatever needs are there, that I serve them in the ways that I can. So that's what they were doing. Now look at verse 16, though. That you also submit to such, and to everyone who works and labors with us. Now there's actually a lot said just in that verse now. But now he's switched the responsibility over. He's talked a little bit about Stephanas, his household, and now he turns his attention to the congregation and says, okay, this is what they are like. Here's what they are doing. Here's what you need to do. Submit. What does that require? Submit within a congregation? Okay, good. And willingness to be under, humility, to accept that you need help, that the guidance, the direction, whatever, to accept other people helping you is not always an easy thing, is it? But also, if you are coming in as someone who is well respected in your work and in your background and all that you do, but you are a baby Christian, is it hard then to enter in that congregation and to not try to let all your background business sense take over rather than your recognition of your spiritual naivete, and acknowledge and be willing to submit? Right? It's just like, I remember from my youth, my dad having to try to explain that someone's PhD in biology was not the same as studying the Bible. That didn't mean that PhD in biology meant he knew biology. Well, kinda. And he had his issues. But it definitely did not establish him as being a Bible teacher. Didn't mean he couldn't. But that's in a different field. Okay? He didn't have that background. He'd have to develop that background. And So I want you to understand that sometimes what we do is we want to take kind of who we are in one area and think it immediately transfers over. And it just doesn't. I remember I was in a graduate class in curriculum design. Sounds enthralling, I know. Okay. Came in handy. But it was taking this class, and it was in my second master's degree, for context now. So I've already done this master's stuff. This was my first education course in a master's. And they were talking, and those of you who are educators, they were throwing around acronyms. You know, only the government, and the government and school, they throw around acronyms all over the place. They were throwing these letters around as if they were magic. We just toss them out, and this, this test and this idea and this, and I'm sitting here. Okay, I've done history, I'm doing political science. This I have not done. I don't know what this is. So I just raised my hand in the middle of class and said, I'm very sorry, but I'm not a teacher. I have no idea what you're talking about. Not my area, not my field. And they kindly then realized, oh, that's right. We can't take those things for granted. And there was more explanation given. Well, you both need people who will do the explanation, but you also have to say, I don't care what you've done in your past. If you don't know, you don't know. Okay? So you need that as part of the interaction. So to submit to such. Why? Those who have given their time and their efforts, their energies and their interests to you to help you. They've got the background you do not have. Respect it. And he says to such, that means anybody like this. Okay? And then he describes what that means. And to everyone who works and labors with us. Now, the two verbs, says to everyone you can understand, but it's qualified by this. That first word when he says that works, to work, it's working together. And it's important because it's like arm in arm. Now you can tell, at least in the idea, the us is not present technically. It's found in the idea of with, together, doing it together. But let's think about this a little bit. What does Paul just do by connecting Stephanus and his household that he's left behind? He taught them. He left them behind. They're working. But what does Paul call it? Working together with him, arm in arm with him. To appreciate what it is that when you are part of the work and you step up to do things that need to be done in the congregation, that ties you together with all who are doing the work. Paul was an apostle responsible for establishing congregations throughout the Roman Empire and for solidifying them, strengthening them, and trying his best to create unity between Jew and Gentile. That's quite a resume. And yet he made very deliberate efforts to point out that as far as he was concerned, those other people who were behind in the congregations, capable, they were doing the same kind of work. And therefore, it was the reason why I say this is the word work, it's tied to this, it has a preposition. There's a point to this. Soon. There are three choices for prepositions that mean with. This one has the idea typically of a statement of equality with it. It doesn't mean that they were apostles. It just means from Paul's point of view, he's not in any way lifting himself up or declaring a difference. He's just saying we're in this together. The second one, laboring. Let's see if I can get anybody to tell me what the difference between working and laboring is. Okay. All right. Yes, Robert, I know. 2 years of school under me, exhaustion, I get it. That is what the second word, the idea of laboring, it's typically translated that way anyway, does emphasize the toll it takes on you. Okay? So notice what he's done. He's emphasized two aspects of what they were doing. It's activity, that's the word work, okay? But it's work that is united in purpose and in fellowship. That's the type of work it was, even though they were apart. And work that took its toll. It's not easy work. It takes extra hours, extra time, extra energy to do work in the church. Okay? And he is talking about them that's one of the reasons you need to be willing to recognize that. So what are you really doing? You're not submitting in that sense to that person as if they are over you in some kind of rank, even though it is a military term. By the context, you're putting yourself under what they are doing because they're helping fulfill a need you have, whether that's instruction, teaching you things you didn't know, providing for needs that you had, helping you learn along the way, just kind of stepping up. Go ahead, Greg.
The verb that you talk about in verse 15 about ordering things,
Mm-hmm.
I learned it in like, the example when I was learning that was military formation.
Right.
You fall in line, and so that's the overarching order. And then he uses the same verb with the prefix. So the order is one thing, but are you going to fall in line?
That's right.
Line up with others and behind others beside others.
Yeah, the idea of putting yourself underneath it, which is it's order and under, essentially, right? So if you take this, you say, okay, we're gonna move forward on doing all of this. I'm willing to accept that someone else knows more or someone's been here before. Go into a congregation, it's different. Okay? You need to kind of learn the lay of the land. Find out about people and help others do that. And that's kind of that attitude from both sides. He's just presenting both sides of that equation of actually what it takes to get work done and to do it with unity, which is important when you go all the way back to the beginning of this book, of the mindset it takes to do that. Verse 17. I am glad about the coming of Stephanas, Fortunatus, and Achaicus, for what was lacking for your part, they supplied. Now, he's going to go in verse 18. He says, for they refresh my spirit and yours, therefore acknowledge such men. That tells us that these three were doing something that not everybody else was doing, and its effect on Paul. What did they do? They came, but they came with something in particular. Probably money. Quite possibly. Though it's hard when you go back and you look at, a lot of times he was not getting all the help, and Corinth had money. Remember, he's asking them for things. But it's for others. These three, though, and it's interesting he refers to Stephanas again. What was lacking on your part, they supplied. What was lacking? Well, no, because it's what they supplied for Paul. So Paul's not lacking the gospel. So it's something that they were doing then. Isn't it interesting that he follows this idea of serving people with this particular example relevant to him? Stephanas is put in the lead on this. as being someone who is participating, as well as Fortunatus and Achaicus, those who wanted to participate. But what does the idea of lacking mean? Doesn't that mean that there was a responsibility there? Say it again. There was a shortage. Okay, there's some kind of shortage. They were providing for that. Paul regularly, you see this probably more specifically in the book of Philippians, which is a few years later. But the idea of that lacking he uses, if you think about the idea that he was able to still be content, even though he lacked, well, this is that idea. There was a lack there. There was a need there, and that they were there to be able to help with that need, and that they supplied it. They were there to be able to take care, and the word supply, to fill it up. So it just, okay, here's the lack, so let's see if we can't refill the coffers a little bit to get everything up to where it needs to be. Okay. They indicated that they had something, but yeah, partly the need would be, yeah, he was benefited. Now he's in a good place. Ephesus is pretty strong, but some of that too in their coming is beneficial from what you get in verse 18, which is where you're going. For they refreshed my spirit and yours. The question is did they have to do anything other than arrive to refresh his spirit? Okay. But it'd be one to say they refreshed my spirit, but the yours is actually pretty interesting. Brock? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that there's the people, if you think going back to David, when the people who stayed behind and watched the stuff, you remember, I always loved that king, watch the stuff, the baggage. Okay, that he said, no, they're going to be compensated for this too. Why? It's still an important part. But yeah, they were doing something that mattered and filled up, so they were providing something that was missing. Whether that was financial, which I think is possible, you also have, maybe it was maybe he was down some workers too. The interesting, that's why I say the most interesting part is when he says, my spirit and yours. Number one, he talks about it in spiritual terms. He's not talking about being physically refreshed, but spiritually refreshed. That it brightens up for him what he is doing, and it puts it in that kind of context. And whatever they were doing should have meant something to the Corinthians too, which is why he included them. That for them, for the refreshment, that the whole idea of refreshment it's an interesting kind of word. It has the idea of allowing an intermission in which to rest. Take a break. Well, what does that mean? They step it up, providing stepping in to when somebody needs a break. Maybe it's part of the work that they needed, and that they were providing for all of that. Chris?
I like the idea of when you have a really good brother you're talking to as well, being able to feed off of one another, become refreshed in that spiritual conversation that you get, and being able to have that kind of camaraderie as well.
I think that's got to be a possibility too. Yeah, I think the camaraderie, you go back some time and just building up, and it's a reminder of the value Paul's seeing of that this mattered. When you have people come and visit you from other places, I got to see when I was recently gone. I actually saw people, not only when I was doing a funeral from someone that I worked with over 20 years ago, and got to see that family member, many of the other elders and deacons that I worked with then. Just refreshing to see them again. But I also went back, and when we went on our campaign, I saw someone I went to school with over 30 years ago. And I saw someone I taught in a different school 25 years ago. Then when I went and spoke on a lectureship, same trip, I saw someone that had been one of my teachers in school. And just those interactions about being able to, someone who took the time to be there because I was there. It's pretty meaningful. It means a lot. And it picks you up and makes you reflect on all else that you've done and that there is value there. But look at this last phrase. Therefore, okay, so we're going to conclude. Therefore, acknowledge such men. In verse 16, it's submit to such. The end of 18, acknowledge such. So you have a similar kind of a parallelism to what he is doing here. And the two things is they serve and they refresh. So they are about people, about taking up, serving in ministry then was to some way taking up a burden off somebody. Just a light burden maybe, information, but it's picking up a burden and carrying that load for a while. And refreshed is then lifting somebody else up. So whatever else you are doing, you have examples of, is the nature of what we ought to be doing in our work is to look around and realize when there are opportunities to lift people up when they're down and lift them up even higher when we see them and what they're doing that matters and encourage them onward. That's such an important role when you look at what's going on in the church. Okay? And I think this is really important when you look at, we always think of Corinthians as 1 Corinthians particularly being so negative, kind of a lot of problems going on. And here at the end, he's trying to get them beyond that. And I hope that we can just take simple little lessons from this and yet realize that some of those small ways of helping one another go a long way. And we will pick up there next week.